fellow. He was named Dr. Julian Barrett. Fellow, as I say, being a senior tutor or someone running the college. Now, he had rooms on just the other side of that building, in staircase A. He was a very private man, and he would not let anyone else into his rooms. Even when he went on holidays, he wouldn't leave the key with the porters, which would be the normal thing to do. Wouldn't let the cleaners in at all. Now, rumour had it, things get round, someone said he had a coffin in his room. Would you believe? Well, no more was thought of this until late one night, from behind his door came these terrifying screams. Other fellows and students went to break down the door to find out what was happening. When they eventually broke down the door, there was silence. They went into Dr. Barrett's rooms and they looked around. There was no one in there, nothing to be seen. But there was a coffin in there. They lifted the lid of the coffin, and occupying the coffin was Dr. Julian Barrett, now deceased. No explanation as to how he got there or how he met his fate. Another thing about kings is worth mentioning is there's Montague Rose James, better more widely known as M.R. James, famous ghostwriter, probably the most famous ghostwriter in the English history. Now, he had rooms there. He was a student, a fellow, and eventually master. And while he was fellow, this time of the year, just before Christmas, he'd invite his friends up, and by candlelight, he'd read his latest spine-chilling ghost stories. So that's M.R. James. We're now passing under Clare Bridge. There's many bridges across the backs here, as they're called, and it was always thought that because we're back to that smelly medieval times, plague often struck Cambridge. And the fellows and students would often escape back to their homes. The townsfolk didn't have that option, of course, and that's why there were so many bridges. Now, Clare Bridge, this one built in 1638, is the oldest existing college bridge. And the reason it remains the oldest is that in the Civil War, when Oliver Cromwell and his parliamentarians took on and fought King Charles I, Cromwell made his base here in Cambridge. After all, he was a local lad. He was born in Huntingdon, and he came to Sydney Sussex College here. He destroyed all the other bridges to help in his defence should he be attacked here. But he left this bridge because at the time, Clare College, where we've just passed, was undergoing repairs. It was a building site, more or less. And so he used all the stone there to help fortify the castle up on Castle Hill. Because Cambridge doesn't have its own building materials as such. There was a particular strange fellow there at Clare as well. His name was Robert Green. Now, in his will, he left all his books and his wealth to his college. Now, there wasn't anything particularly unusual in that. We must remember that until 1882, fellows were not allowed to marry. Or if they did marry, they had to leave their fellowship. This meant leaving some really nice wine, some good cooking, some nice rooms, and a fairly straightforward job teaching in the colleges. So most of them retained their independence. Of course, this also meant that when they died, they didn't have family to leave all their wealth to. So more often than not, they'd leave it to their colleges. Well, Robert Green was no different in that respect. He left his money and his books, a considerable amount of books, to Clare. But there was a peculiar caveat in his will. He insisted that to qualify to get these gifts, his body was to have all the flesh stripped from it and buried separately, and his skeleton was to remain hanging in the college library.
Oh dear.
Yes, oh dear, madam, sorry about that. And what was also oh dear, not only for Clare, but of course for Robert Green as well, it was unfortunately he died when he wasn't here in Cambridge. I think he was in York somewhere and buried there. Well, Clare desperately wanted this booty of stuff, so what were they to do about it? They thought outside the box. They borrowed a skeleton, the story goes. I don't know how you go about doing that, but they did. Convinced the executors of the will that this was the skeleton of Robert Green, and so inherited his books and his money. There the skeleton stood in the Clare Library. Now, many years later, there was a library refit. The skeleton was taken away during the refit and put in a cupboard and forgotten about, and indeed lost to history. But it's said that that is where the expression, finding a skeleton in your cupboard, comes from. So, dear old Robert Green and wanting his skeleton to hang in Clare.
Yeah.
We are now coming up past Trinity. Another famous college, founded in 1546 by that well-known king, King Henry VIII. Very much a changing point for the colleges. Henry VIII had already dissolved all the monasteries, taken over the land and the wealth, because that dastardly pope, as he saw him, wouldn't give him a divorce from his first wife.